yellow flag is out. Sam Kreitzer, Ricardo Rico, and Brendan Lichtenberg, a 3-car pileup.
Brendan Lichtenberg's wearing a little bit more formal attire today in the expectation, his words not mine, that this might be his very last IndyCar Pro Series race.
My name is Brendan, and I am yet another washed-up professional sim racer. But a professional sim racer with a platform, and I'm here to tell you about how my IndyCar butt kicker iRacing Pro Series went and some of the things I learned along the way. In my last video about this, I talked to you about how just making it to the Pro Series was the achievement. I told you then, while I felt like this was something I had earned, I also took it as an accomplishment for all the other work I had done before. I've been on iRacing since 2012, and that means I've driven 3 different iterations of the IndyCar, and yes, that means I started driving the crap wagon, the Dallara IR05, which is kind of emblematic of like the dark days of like American open wheel racing during this century. The initial excitement really wore off pretty quickly, and reality set in about this series. This series was a stacked field, with familiar names in sim racing esports on the grid. There's Team Redline, whom 1994 German Grand Prix pit lane fire survivor and 1994 Hungarian Grand Prix podium finisher Jos Verstappen frequently checked in on the proceedings for the team. It was clearly not Max, right? It was definitely his dad. Coanda Esports and Williams Esports were also present on the grid, alongside Drago Racing. And then there's the community team contingent, either just happy to be there, or aiming higher than many people perhaps expected out of them. The 2 biggest community teams in the series were Team Hype / Powerslide, and ourselves, Team I5G. As far as how we did, it's just best that we get this out of the way right now. Out of 33 qualifiers, I finished P27 in the championship. Jacob, my teammate, did better than me, finishing 19th out of 33 drivers. So after all that, I am thrilled to proclaim we were not last. We did not finish last in this championship, and that was one of our goals actually entering this championship, was simply to not finish last. As the standings kind of reflect, this season really was a struggle in many different ways that I really did not anticipate at all. After the final race at Nashville, I was basically telling people that I would be lying if I told you I wasn't a little relieved or even like happy that the series was over. Over the season, there were just too many mistakes that I made, or there are certain situations I could not perform very well, like one-lap qualifying, for example, that really hurt my overall finishing position. But at the same time, there's still some bright spots that we can be proud of. We can be proud of the way we drove at Indianapolis, where we started dead last, but gained 19 spots as the biggest move of the race, finishing P12. Only 3 spots behind Michele Costantini, who started in the back with us as well, and this is our best result on the ovals. At Mid-Ohio, the 1994 German Grand Prix start crash I rooted for came true, and I avoided the carnage and kept my car on the track to finish P19, finishing above the minimum points total. Well, for me, anyway, because this is a major accomplishment to score more than minimum points on a road course. For someone who was a backmarker on the road courses, and for how much we struggled there in pro qualifying, Mid-Ohio was a really good positive takeaway. At Gateway, we put all the chips in 00 when a caution came out many laps before a fuel window. With no real stick shot driving through the field, I went as long as possible on fuel and prayed for a miracle caution. Unfortunately, we didn't get it, but hearing that there were certain people in certain offices in Massachusetts standing on their feet as I led the race, hearing that was very heartwarming. While things didn't really go the way I wanted, there's still a lot of things that I learned just being an iRacing pro for perhaps one and only season, we'll see. And I wanted to share some of those things with you and some of my other thoughts about running in this series. So without further ado, here's my top 10 list. Number 1, the skill gap is massive. This was obvious coming into the series, because even amongst the community regulars, there were really only 1 or 2 that my road course pace matched. My worst fear of being the series backmarker on road courses was causing any trouble to the top end of the grid. Frankly, in any other series, I deserve to be nowhere near them. I can only imagine the reactions in each team's Discord calls, seeing my blue name pop up on their relative each week on the road courses as they approached to lap me. Now, despite this obvious speed difference, the one thing I felt rather humored by was, even in the pre-race practice when everyone's doing their key laps, whenever I was on my flying lap, these pros would just move over for me like you would do in any other series, which I found baffling and almost felt bad by, because frankly, I was probably going to crash in that lap anyway. They didn't need to move over. So it was quite obvious before the series and during the series, there's a skill gap that's going to take decades to overcome, if that. And perhaps never will. In fact, no, I never will. Let's be honest here. In terms of road course pace, I know where my limit is. And part of that is because I'm 33 years old. Yeah, I'm 33. Trust me, when people see me and I tell them that, it kind of freaks them out a little bit. I raise that point not to be melodramatic about my age, but to prove the point of this is a younger person series. There's literal teenagers in the series. I think the youngest driver was 16, for example. And the driving potential of someone who's 16 compared to someone who's older like me in their 30s, you can guess which one has more potential. I think overall in the series, there's only 2 other people besides me who are in their 30s. Everyone else was below 30. So obviously, my road course skills are not going to get any better. I'm not going to get any faster. And on the oval side, that's a discipline you can actually probably do into your 50s in real life. That happens all the time. That is still to say, for number 2 though, we do belong on the ovals. Indy showed we could advance through the field and that our Indy 500 experience across 10 top split broadcast starts had paid off. I consider myself a good oval driver in IndyCar, and on my best day, we can contend for big wins. Number 3, it's not always fun. After the enthusiasm of the beginning of the season wore off, the Pro Series became more routine than an event I always look forward to. I know that sounds off, given how desperately I wanted to qualify, but I believe some of the drivers at the front of the grid perhaps felt the same way. Now, of course, the big difference between these drivers and me at the top end of the grid is they are professionals. They have contracts. In effect, they may have had a boss tell them, congratulations, you are now running this series for the team. So like for even me alone, 10 weeks straight of this was quite draining. And for the amount of work for the pros, like the real pros, the ones being paid pros, the amount of the work they put into it, I'm sure was just as draining as well. Having to do 10 weeks of that, honestly, at times, it felt very easy for me to kind of mentally quit if I wanted to. I've been on teams in sports where we've been like absolutely destroyed and I just kind of wanted to stop playing or quit. You know, you may have heard on the broadcast, I have a black belt in judo. You don't necessarily get a black belt in judo for knowing all the throws. You kind of get a black belt in judo because you get up from all the throws instead. The point of it being, from this experience, I know that oftentimes an endeavor like this is almost like Sisyphus pushing the boulder up the hill and it repeatedly falls back down. But deep down inside, I knew I did not want to quit. The most important reason being was I wanted to do this, I chose to do this, and I wanted to be here. The second other reason I felt was also really important to me was that because I finished P33 in IndyCar Pro qualifying, if I had stopped or quit, I felt that would have been extremely disrespectful to P34 or anyone else who may have wanted a spot just as bad as I did, but didn't make the top 33. So unless I had to stop because I had some personal reason or professional reason why I could no longer run the series, I had no plans of quitting. Number 4, it's a different kind of fun. If you are doing something that is truly causing you to be unhappy, then I feel you should reevaluate what you're doing. But I wanted to be here. I wanted to test and see how I could do in a professional series, even if it meant finishing the championship the way I did. It was also fun sharing the track with many accomplished people in sim racing. And by sharing the track, I mean obeying the blue flags whenever they passed me on road courses. Number 5, you cared. If not, why did so many people choose to watch my Twitch streams? I was actually stunned by the viewership I had. I almost felt bad having a max viewership of 273 people watch me bumble around Barber while driving through the grass to avoid the leaders because parking my car in the fast chicane was not an option. At one round, we even had kind of a mini Casey Curran effect, where my stream nearly matched the viewer count of the iRacing official broadcast on their Twitch channel. Knowing so many of you looked forward to watching and celebrating some of the successes we had, or decompressing after the bad races, it was a big factor in helping me keep going. Number 6, the race isn't always on the track. And after all, you probably found this channel not because of my alleged skillful driving, but more than likely because of the series I made called Arca Break Weekly. Real racing very much has a business side, and it's unquestionable that running the series was a boon for my Twitch channel in terms of viewership. I've even joked with my friends that if this ever gets big enough to have free agency, like the eNASCAR Coca-Cola iRacing series has at the moment, I might prove to be a very valuable asset. I'm not saying I could be a ride buyer, but I could pay back the series in exposure. Number 7, promoting your team is fun. When Jacob and I qualified for the series, I was determined to promote our presence and the series itself. Everyone knows the thought question of the tree falling in the forest. If the tree falls in the forest and no one sees it, did it really fall? In the media, the same can be said of your accomplishments. If no one talks about it, then did it really happen? Many of my social media graphics I made through Twitter and Instagram carried the irreverent or sarcastic style that I usually have because, let's be honest, I think many of you would find us acting 100% serious to not be interesting. That's why the video of me, Brandon, and Jacob being interrogated by Matt before the first round is one of my favorite videos we have ever done together for the channel. Frankly, the style also helps us when things don't go our way. We laugh so we don't cry. Number 8. Losing sucks. Even though I understood that this would be the most challenging thing I would ever do in sim racing, and it may not go the way I wanted to, being in the back of the field, or in any position where I struggled, felt disheartening. If I was in this position 10 years ago, I would have handled it terribly from a mental standpoint. I'm a very competitive person, and while I can deal with not being the fastest, it is tough seeing yourself rock bottom of the timing sheets. Sometimes it always felt like a me problem, and ultimately it was because this is individual competition. Number 9. This series is not for everyone, and it is perfectly okay if this series is not for you. This is the phrase that greeted us when we were emailed after being accepted into the Pro Series. This is a very direct statement to each driver that it would be in your best interest to act in a professional manner with grace and respect towards all, or you would not be involved very long in this series. This line in the email became kind of a meme within our circle. We took it seriously, but we kind of always mentioned it sarcastically, like if we ever felt we were struggling at any point. The series might not be for you, and that's perfectly okay. And I kind of took that as my own interpretation of, well, is this series for me? Now, I acted in a professional manner. I didn't get a single penalty point all season. I didn't intentionally wreck anyone either. That happened at one of the rounds. But the question was, like, did I need to do this? And the answer is no, I didn't need to do this, but I wanted to do it, and this is a goal I had set for myself. The truth is I gave up a lot of time making content in order to participate in this series, and in effect, that is money I lose out on. It's not like a lot of money, it's just money I can put back into sim racing, but money nevertheless that I was probably not going to earn running a series of this magnitude. It wasn't impossible, but probably highly unlikely. And obviously, yes, you earn money through viewership that I did doing this series, but overall, during this 10-week period, I had significantly less streams and videos than I normally would do. So I kind of always asked myself that question, and I asked that question before I did it too. However, when I take everything into account, I truly feel that in the end, this was worth it. I once asked this question on stream one time. I asked kind of a hypothetical of like, if I could ask like a typical driver on the Coke Series grid and on the NASCAR side, and if I asked them the question, do you do this because you like it, or do you do it because there's a lot of money involved on the eNASCAR side of things? I was curious kind of like what they might say. Is it someone who really loves sim racing, or is it kind of more of a means to an end? Because I definitely do know people in that latter category who are using it more as a means to an end and kind of for monetary value. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I love that, actually. I think that's great. It's kind of recognizing what this is. You only have a set period of time in any kind of competitive esports, but especially in sim racing. As for myself, I did the series because I enjoy it. I love iRacing, and I love IndyCars in particular. And overall, when it comes like to my content, same thing. I do sim racing because I enjoy it ultimately. I've mentioned this quote a couple different times on my Twitch streams. I want to state it again because it really kind of honestly perfectly encapsulates how I feel about sim racing. Now, the quote's from a real racing driver about racing itself and how they don't really like the business aspect of it and would be glad that if it would be gone. It doesn't really kind of match exactly what I do, but it matches my feelings exactly. During the F1 driver strike right before the 1982 South African Grand Prix, Gilles Villeneuve was quoted as saying the following: "The sport is more important than anything, more important than any of the people in it. Of course I say what I think. I always have. Even if it upsets people like Ecclestone and Ballest. Why should I be afraid of them? The fans aren't here to see politicians and manipulators. They're here to see Alain and Mario and Carlos and me. I am very secure in my feelings about racing. I make a lot of money from it. But one thing I can tell you for sure, if the money disappeared overnight, I would still be in racing because I love it. The entrepreneurs would be gone." Since I obviously didn't finish top 12 in points, me and 20 other drivers, we lost our pro licenses. In fact, I think mine was taken away like literally the next day after the last race of the season. Unless there's a contender style series like the NASCAR side does, we're gonna have to run the gamut of pro qualifying again next year if we choose to compete again. Because the top 12 are locked in and will return next season in pro, That does mean, most likely, there will be fewer spots available to qualify for the series unless they change the max entry list. As the last driver to qualify for the Pro Series to begin with in 33rd, obviously, that's 12 more spots I'm going to have to gain if I want to qualify in for the Pro Series once more. And honestly, it really is kind of in doubt if that is possible. I don't think that's impossible, but that will certainly make it harder than qualifying already was for me last time around. So that in fact does mean this is perhaps my first and last season as a pro, well, at least according to iRacing. But until qualifying comes around, I don't have to worry about making a decision, and maybe the time off, I'll be happy to jump right back in and try and make another go of it. At the very least, I'm just glad that I can return more to streaming and content creation, which is what I love to do. And honestly, actually, like the past couple days, I've been doing a lot of Twitch streams, and I've just like felt happier or just like more relaxed, probably like just more relaxed in general. I just want to conclude by saying thank you once again for basically the same reasons I thanked you in the qualifying video for just encouraging me to try this, because I'm not saying I didn't have the confidence, but I didn't have the confidence. Everything I've done has been almost been like a one-way ticket to not qualifying for a Pro Series, like dedicating my time not to driving, but making Arca Break Weekly, for example, which took up a ton of time. It took up a lot more time than it did like doing stuff for the Pro Series, actually. From there, and then covering our Indy 500 wins as a team, I'm just glad that all of you have been along for the ride. And every day I understand that I'm incredibly privileged to have a platform like I do here on YouTube, as well as on Twitch and just social media in general, and like kind of like the sim racing sphere. There's one final thing I want to share with you, and maybe this makes everything that I've done both on Twitch and YouTube preordained in some way. For Christmas in 1997 or 96, 98, somewhere around there, we got computer games for our new computer. One of which was the Oregon Trail, which is actually a game I play a lot on stream on Twitch. And the other game, how apropos, Papyrus and IndyCar Racing. Unfortunately, we actually had to go to my grandparents' house to play this game. It didn't even work on our computer, so it took me a few years to actually play with my keyboard. And by playing it, I turned invulnerability on and drove in reverse at the Milwaukee Mile and wrecked every car, and then I completed the laps and won the races. That's kind of how I played when I was a kid. But when my dad presumably got this from the bargain bin at Walmart at the time, I'm sure he had no idea what he was unleashing for the future. And in some way, I do have to thank my dad for that. So once again, I just want to thank you for watching this video. If you have any questions for me, if you have specific questions about the IndyCar Pro Series or anything else you found interesting about this video, please let me know down in the comments, and I will see you in the next video.